Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with the presentation and just to get us all started. First of all, again, thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on who we are and what we're doing here. So just for those of you who aren't familiar, NoCo Housing Now is a coalition of folks from the Northern Colorado community, being folks with various jurisdictions, as well as private sector participants, foundational participants that really have come together to talk about how we develop strategies and share information to address the housing issue, which obviously affects all parts of the state. But just for those of you, again, who aren't familiar, it is a voluntary group that we meet routinely, and then we do these quarterly events where we invite subject matter experts to come in and present information that would be useful, not just to the folks here in Northern Colorado, but again, as you'll see as we go through this presentation, we try to make it relevant for other parts of the state as well, and obviously enjoy the voices of other folks to come and help us talk about this issue. Should know though that this series is presented by Kaiser Permanente, their generous financial support to help us support this conversation and securing, again, strategies and policies that we can then share with our partners. The operational support comes from the Fort Collins Area Chamber of Commerce, who I'm representing on a consulting basis. But just to kind of tee up the conversation for today, just for those of you who may already know this, you can chime in, but just a primer on manufactured home communities, that really came into being following World War II and mostly through the 1980s, with the idea of delivering housing quickly with minimal infrastructure requirements, simply just to house people. And in a lot of cases, these mobile home communities started out as temporary housing solutions that have now become permanent. And one of the major changes that occurred back in '76 is, prior to '76, there was kind of an informal building code to these manufactured homes. And in '76, HUD stepped in to kind of establish some baseline building code requirements. And, all this is really, I think, central to the issue that we run in today, is that you've got a wide range of both park types and their relative capacity to serve as permanent housing, as well as the homes themselves, long viewed as depreciating assets because they were really designed to be, kind of a vacation trailer that folks took up with them when they went on vacation up to the lake, but have become permanent housing. And again, prior to '76, with the lack of uniformity in the design and construction of those units, it makes it extremely hard for them to, it makes it extremely hard for the homeowners to really update their home. You can't easily go to Home Depot and buy a replacement screen window, or even an appliance for that matter. A lot of times it's custom type product. Since '76, there's been more uniformity. There continues to be advancements in that, in terms of creating a kind of a standardized building code. In fact, manufactured home today do conform to International Residential Building Code, so they do look a lot like a stick-built home. And in many cases, you really can't tell the difference. But the big difference between manufactured home communities and a manufactured home that sits in a traditional neighborhood is that the land is held by typically a single party. And in the past, those tended to be kind of the mom and pop type operations where they had a little extra land. They, again, turned it into a park. And now they have become very attractive to real estate investors. And again, that presents some additional challenges, because you've got one party holding the title and a different party that owns title to the home that sits on it. And so that creates some challenges. The homeowners themselves do pay a lot rent, which typically, includes common area maintenance, but it may also include utilities, because sometimes parks do not have individual meters for the home sites or pad sites, as they may be referred to. So they have domestic water, sewer, and electric, but a lot of times those are on a single meter, and so they're apportioned out to the homeowners pro rata, again, which presents some challenges internally. But in general, homes that are located within manufactured home communities are ineligible for conventional mortgage financing simply due to the split ownership condition. So conventional financing, not only does the home need to be permanently attached to the land, but the homeowner traditionally needed to have title to the land as well. That has changed a little bit in terms of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two largest mortgage conduits, as well as FHA, have started to slowly loosen some of their restrictions, but still presents an extraordinarily challenge for those that are either renting their lot space on a month-to-month basis, or even on an annual lease basis, still doesn't qualify for conventional mortgage financing. So that presents some challenges in and of itself. To put this into regional perspective, we have roughly 100,000 households in northern Colorado that reside in manufactured home communities. 37 manufactured home communities have been registered with the state in Larimer County, representing just about 5,000 home sites. 45 registered in Weld County, a little over 5,000 home sites. And those are all what exists today through the state registry. And so for those of you who may not know, the state did pass legislation in the last session that required, well, I'm sorry, 2 sessions ago, that required park owners to register with the state and provide ongoing information. So at least we have a better sense of what's out there, whereas prior to that, we really didn't know. But all of those homes, virtually all of those homes, exist without, and were placed and continue to operate without any public subsidy that would preserve affordability. Very little money public subsidy is used to improve the health, safety, and energy efficiency of these homes or the infrastructure within the parks. And anecdotal information suggests that at least that parks are predominantly occupied by low or moderate income households and or senior headed households. And I thought it would be interesting to contrast that with a little bit with the low income housing tax credit, which is, for those of you who may not know, that's really the largest source of capital for creating and preserving housing that targets low and moderate income households. And that program came into existence in 1986. And just to kind of put this in comparison, since that time, we've seen 56 properties that have been, again, created and preserved with the low income credit that encompasses 5,200 apartments in Larimer County, 29 properties representing about 1,600 individual housing units in Weld County. I wasn't able to get information to show or at least confirm the amount, but we've roughly those.
Sure.
What about 90 properties that have been constructed with low-income housing tax credits have come at the cost of, again, through these tax credits, have come at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think it's worthwhile to bear that in mind, that we have, roughly, well, we have.
No, it's just Will at willflowers.com.
I'm sorry. Can people mute if you're not already on mute? Getting some feedback here. So at any rate, the point is that we've created roughly 7,000 units using hundreds of millions of dollars, and we have 10,000 units that have no public subsidy. And now it's come to a point where we really do need to preserve those existing units, simply because we don't have the capacity to absorb 10,000 households using a program that since '86 has generated fewer units. So there's a real train wreck coming here if we don't get out in front of this issue. So real quickly, why is resident ownership important, or why do we feel it's important? So contrary to popular terminology, manufactured homes are generally not mobile. They haven't trailed anything in years and not likely to.
Yes.
In fact, a lot of times the only way to move them is to
Hi, I'm doing well.
demolish
How are you?
My right front tooth. I have a
I'm-
tooth story to share.
I'm sorry. Can folks use mute?
I was about
Please mute.
it was in 8th grade, I'm pretty sure.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. If
Joe,
everyone,
do you have the possibility of muting people as the host?
yeah, I'm trying to
or
find
can the
out who.
host do it?
It was a
Okay.
monthly.
Trying to
It's a
find out
few
who's not on mute.
Looks like Will
I think
Flowers.
there
There
and
we go.
Luce. Oh, Luce is now muted.
I'm gonna take care of that. There we go. All right. Sorry about that.
32, somewhere in there. 32,000, I think, something like that.
Yep. Okay. I think we've got it. All right. Sorry about that. We'll get back to the show. Okay. So when landowners elect to sell or redevelop, landowners are in fact allowed to sell or redevelop their land without the prior consent of homeowners, which creates a problem because homeowners can't, unlike those who may be occupying an apartment, you can't really pick up your home and move to a different location. So it makes it extraordinarily challenging, and in fact could be financially devastating for a lot of residents of these communities when in fact either the use of the land changes or where it gets sold to another investor who, again, as we'll walk through here, are paying a fairly heavy price for future cash flows, which means that lot rents almost always go up whenever a property changes hands. And again, homeowners have limited, if any, options to relocate. And so again, resident-owned conversion provides some greater, it does provide greater stability for the residents, but it does also open up some additional financing options simply because as a resident-owned community, the residents themselves own the land cooperatively. And in almost all cases, they enter into long-term lease agreements, which may be as long as 99 years. And with a 99-year lease in place for the lot, the homeowner can now access additional financing mechanisms. They're again, very close to conventional financing. So it does make a huge difference for the homeowner. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists today that are going to give you the real information. So we have Andy Cadlick, who is our program director from Thistle Rock, which is located down in Boulder. Michael Sloss, who is the managing director for ROC USA Capital, which ROC stands for Resident Owned Communities, which is a national organization that is spearheading this, this market niche. And we also have Emily Gorgel, who is a partnership and grants director for the La Familia, the Family Center here in Fort Collins. She's also a member of the City Fort Collins Council. We have Tracy Stewart, who's a senior program officer for Colorado Health Foundation. And then we also have a couple of residents of Animas Village. And I apologize, you guys can correct me. I've seen it both as Riverview and as Animas. I'm assuming there is a name change with your conversion to a resident-owned community. But if Carol Pontius, I believe Coral is with us today. And then myself, I'm the moderator, and frankly, I know nothing. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy at this point, who can then share with us more of his background, what he's been working on, and talk us through really some of the early stage mechanics of this resident conversion process. I ask that as we go through these presentations, if you have questions, please raise your hand, because using the reactions function at the bottom of your screen, if you haven't used this before, there's a reactions button. It's got a little happy face with a button on it, or a plus on it. And you can click on that. It says raise your hand. And what that will do is move you up in my screen so I know that you have a question that you want to ask. So if you would please do that. And then as we get to the end of the presentations, we'll open it up for just general dialogue. So again, with that, Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will share my screen with you if you do have any slides that you want to share.
Hey, great, Joe. Thanks so much for organizing this and bringing all these individuals together here. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and as well as a lot of new faces in the crowd right here. So I won't share any slides today. I'll just have a brief conversation and open it up for questions. Once again, my name is Andy Cadlick. I work for Thistle Rock, and I'm Thistle Rock's program director. I've been at Thistle for a little over 6 years right now. Thistle is a affordable housing nonprofit based in Boulder County. We've been in Boulder County for close to 30 years, and most recently have partnered with the ROC program, Resident Owned Community Program, or ROC USA, another nationwide nonprofit to, as Joel mentioned, really engage with residents of manufactured housing parks, give them the opportunity to organize as a cooperative, secure financing, work with partners like Thistle and ROC USA and ROC Capital, and purchase their park and become resident owned. And so we do have, I believe, 4 actually members from the Animus View board here, which is really great to see. And I know that the resident perspective will be kind of discussed a little bit farther down the road here, but I just do want to thank those 4 individuals for taking their time to being here. It's really great to see residents who are, supportive of their own conversion, but as well as supportive of taking the time to share their experience with others, because no matter how much people like Joe and I speak, the message isn't nearly as strong as when it comes from the residents who are living in and living in that park, living in that community. But Thistle Rock is what we call an affiliate of the ROC USA program, and are working in the state of Colorado statewide to assist residents with conversion and analyzation of their park's purchase. Animus View is a community out in Durango, and so it's quite a ways away from Boulder, but we're still able to work with that community. To date, we've really been working full time with the ROC program for about 2 years. To date, we have 3 resident-owned communities that we have helped convert. 2 of those communities are in Fremont County in Canyon City. Another community is in Boulder County in Longmont, Colorado. And we are really excited to be, in the process of closing 2 additional parks in June. So Animus View is one of those communities, 116 unit community in Durango. And another community is Sans Souci, which is in South Boulder, 62 units. So, we're seeing a lot of growth and opportunity here, which we're really excited about. What we really do, though, is, it's important that we, message to residents, and I'd love to hear the residents' perspective here a little bit later, that the reality of the situation is that the opportunity to purchase is the residents, not ours. We are here as a resource, as a guide, as an advocate, as a coach, as a consultant, but the power and the action is really in the hands of the residents. And so in terms of engaging residents and partners, it's always really important that we let them know that responsibility and let them know what they're really signing up for. Living in a resident-owned community has a lot of rewards and rights, but also a lot of responsibilities. And the strength of a community is directly related to that participation and commitment of the residents and members in the community that want to be involved and really have that desire to shift the power and shift the traditional ownership of how their communities have historically been owned and operated. As we all know, manufactured housing is a very substantial form of housing in the state of Colorado, but it comes with its disadvantages where residents own their homes but do not own the land underneath those homes. We truly feel like this is one of the best opportunities and best ownership structures where residents can truly, take that power, be self-determined, preserve their communities more permanently over time. When they partner with Thistle Rock and ROC USA, they're agreeing to perpetually maintaining their communities as housing and continuing to maintain that affordability over time. And so what we're really doing is taking these communities across the state that at some times are in threat of redevelopment, of closure, and preserving that permanently. And the residents understand that and they agree to that. We do feel that our model brings over time affordability that any other model of housing won't provide, because the owners are the residents that are living in that community. They are making those budget decisions to raise the rent when it's absolutely necessary, to enforce rules that are equitable and agreeable by the people that are living there, and as well as have an engagement or have an interest in maintaining the infrastructure and the community feel as a whole, because they are the individuals living in those communities. So, really there are a lot of great, pros and advantages to this model. There are a lot of challenges, and that reality of that is that it is truly resident led. The ownership is truly resident owned. Thistle Rock does not maintain any sort of ownership stake in these communities, but we are there as a partner over time to give them the support and resources they need to be successful. We always sign an agreement of a minimum of 10 years to be a partner with throughout this process, help guide them through the purchase, as well as stay on afterwards to continue to maintain their annual budget, to put together an appropriate capital improvement plan, and just be that resource they need as individuals who probably haven't owned a manufactured housing park before, and sometimes have some questions on how that process works. So, I'd really just like to stop there and once again, thank the residents for being here. I know we have a pretty structured timeline here, Joe, so be happy to answer any questions now or kind of wait till the end.
Yeah, and maybe if there's some real burning questions, feel free to raise your hand. But otherwise, what we'd like to do is kind of get through the presentations from our panelists, and then we'll open it up for general conversation. And with that, I'm going to introduce Michael Sloss with Rock Capital USA. So, Michael, can you talk a little bit about how these things get financed?
Sure, I can. Welcome Thank you first, all of you, for including me from the East Coast here in this Colorado conversation. I will speak to that in just a second. Let me, if I could, just share my screen and bring up a little PowerPoint. It's just a handful of slides. See if I can get there real quick. And while I'm doing that, I'll just say, Rock USA is a national nonprofit that is totally devoted to this whole issue of resident-owned manufactured home communities. It's all that we do. And we don't, as the managing director of our CDFI, our Community Development Financial Institution, our lending subsidiary, it's what we spend, many hours a week working on every week of the year. So, and Rock USA was formed in 2008, and I joined the organization at that time to be the managing director of the lending part of what we do. But as Andy just referred to, can everybody see my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. As Andy referred to, this is a integrated technical assistance and financing model. So part of what we do at Rock USA is finance homeowner groups to purchase their communities. But before that can happen, all the great work that Andy described that Thistle does and the homeowners do in the pre-development process happens first. And then there's this, as Andy referenced, there's at least a 10-year agreement with the financing for the technical assistance delivery to continue from Thistle or one of the other groups we partner with around the country. So it is an integrated financing and technical assistance model. As you'll hear from some of the homeowners, at Animus View, they're very capable, competent people, but they haven't owned anything yet, right? They're in the process of buying. And so part of our model is to make sure that over the 10 or 15 years of the financing that we provide, that there's ongoing support, as Andy described, for any homeowner group. And just to back up a little bit, and I'll just scroll through these quickly because Joe and Andy have covered some of this. As Joe said, let me run the slideshow here. Here's an old picture from Popular Mechanics in about 1960. And as Joe said, trailers were for camping, and then they morphed into permanent housing. And the business model has not really caught up with that whole dichotomy of land ownership by an investor and home ownership by the individual low and moderate income seniors and families. Here's a picture of Rock USA. The history of this as well, just real quickly, is this model that we use at Rock USA, as I described, the technical assistance and financing model, goes back to the mid-'80s. Our main office is in New Hampshire, Concord, New Hampshire, And the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, which is another CDFI, has been doing this work in New Hampshire since the mid-'80s, and Rock USA grew out of that in 2008. And so if you look at the whole portfolio of resident-owned communities across the country today, there's about 270 of them that have been supported and financed through this model. And about half are in New Hampshire, and about half now are across the country in the other states you see here where we work. As Joe also mentioned, this is predominantly not a subsidized affordable housing model. It is affordable housing, but it's largely not subsidized. And we work in various states with some state agencies that bring some subsidy to the table, but generally this has been a unsubsidized affordable housing model for many years. And here's just a picture of what Rock USA Capital has done to date. We financed 92 communities in 16 states, about 7,600 homes at about $300 million of total investment. And there's probably another $300 or $400 million that New Hampshire Community Loan Fund has done over the years. So over $500 million of investment in this resident ownership model. As I said, about 270 communities. Not one has ever sold the land off to anybody else for redevelopment, and not one has ever decided to close up shop and dissolve. So as Andy mentioned, this is homeowner led. You'll hear from some of the homeowners in a few minutes. But the other thing I want to emphasize here is 87% of the 7,600 homeowners in the communities we've financed to date have incomes below 80% of median, and 60% have incomes below 50% of median. So those of you who track all that for affordable housing programs, this is a very affordable housing stock for low and moderate income homeowners. These are generally not, you can find some high-end manufactured home communities in, next to the lake, next to the ocean in Malibu. There's a couple that people talk about, but for the most part, where most people live, this is workforce housing for low and moderate income people who are nurses, who are government workers, who are agricultural workers, and in every other, walk of life that people go to work every day to, and a lot of seniors, a lot of retirees. So we work with all of those folks. I want to say one other thing about the risk that Joe mentioned in his early comments to introduce this. The risk, of course, is twofold in these communities that he mentioned. One, your rents go up dramatically when a community sells to an investor whose only motive is profit. And we've seen, as he said, we've seen more and more of the hedge funds and similar Wall Street firms get into this asset class in the last several years, and it's become much more competitive to buy these communities, and prices have gone up dramatically because that's one risk. The other risk, of course, is that somebody will change the use of the property and close it down, and there will be no more housing there. So what we try to do is assess every 5 years after residents buy their communities as to what the affordability really is, because the homeowner are going to operate on a not-for-profit basis, of course. Nobody's getting a distribution of dividends at the end of the month or the quarter in these resident-owned communities. And so the analysis we've done with a professional market research firm, independent from us, at 36 communities, is that after 5 years, there may be initial lot rent increase to purchase the community, but after 5 years, generally, the homeowners in resident-owned communities are saving about $28 or $30 a month on average in their lot rent payments compared to their neighbors down the street or a mile away in an investor-owned community. And all while funding important capital improvements to water, sewer, roads, electrical systems, to upgrade all that stuff to, 2021 standards versus whatever the original construction standards may have been when the community was developed. So I think that's really important part of the model to understand. As Joe said, when people purchase as a resident-owned community, they get long-term leases. In our model, perpetual leases. There is no end date to the lot lease in the resident-owned community model that we use. And so with that, a couple of things, as Joe said, can happen. You can qualify for better home financing. You're more likely to put your own money into your home if you've got the security of never having to leave until you want to. And your lot rents are going to be lower over time compared to market. So that justifies putting more money into your home. And there's actually studies that have been done in New Hampshire that when people go to resell their homes in resident-owned communities in New Hampshire, and again, there's over 100 there, the appreciation and the resale value that they achieve is generally a bit higher than in the manufactured home community down the road, where the investor owner has raised rents dramatically over time. There's an inverse relationship between lot rent and home value. The higher the lot rent, the lower the home value. As Joe said, it's a depreciating asset without the long-term lease in place. And in our model, we should be seeing a little bit better appreciation in the home values when rents are stabilized over time. So that's the economic proposition that we offer through the Rock USA model. And I do want to, well, we'll come back to, I do want to go back to just the financing for a second, because that's what Joe asked me to speak about. So you can see this is capital intensive. These communities, average site size that we finance, 80 to 100 sites in a community. The largest community we've financed is over 400 homes. It's a little town basically in central Massachusetts. And that was a $28 million transaction a few years ago. The smallest ones are 20 homes, 25 homes, 30 homes, and they can be $1 million or even less sometimes in financing and everything in between. So, but it's becoming more expensive, and the folks at Animus View can speak to that in a minute. Where we used to see 5 years ago, the average acquisition cost for a community in most parts of the country, $40,000, $50,000 per home site would be the land acquisition cost. It's in some places doubled since then. And I think even in Durango, Colorado, it's closer to $100,000 to $115,000 per site today. So it's becoming more competitive to buy these communities. We have to be sharper as lenders. We have to bring down the cost of financing as much as we can. That's why we in Colorado are working with Thistle and some of the other people on this call, Colorado Health Foundation and the state and others, to bring as much low-cost financing as we can to these transactions. And Rock USA Capital, our products are generally, two or three. We do, it's mentioned here, pre-development loans. In order to get this process started, homeowners need to get an appraisal, get a lawyer, get a civil engineer, an environmental consultant, to do all the things that are normally done in a real estate purchase transaction to vet the community. And so we make unsecured pre-development loans to support that process, and we're willing to lose that money if the transaction doesn't go forward. But we've done over $6 million of that lending in 13 years, and we've lost less than 5% of that. So it's been a very successful product. The other product is simply a very straightforward first mortgage acquisition permanent loan that runs for 10 or 15 years with a 30-year amortization, and it's an amortizing loan, meaning principal and interest payments are fixed and paid every month, and the interest rate is fixed at the beginning. There's no stepping up interest rates over time. So homeowner groups know what their monthly payment's going to be. They can budget around that every year, and it's a very straightforward acquisition loan product. And as you can see, we've done a few $100 million of that. In some cases, we will also do a construction permanent loan product if there's substantial improvements needed in the community to the roads or the water and sewer infrastructure or the electric. So we've made some construction permanent loans that are anywhere from several $100,000 to a couple million. And you see on here, I'm not going to get into this in too much detail, but you see of the 300 million, 70% is sold, 90% is what we call our money retained. We work with dozens of partners, state housing agencies, banks, insurance companies, foundations, other CDFIs, nonprofit lenders, to bring this capital to the table, because we're not a bank, we're not a depository institution. We don't turn around other people's money and make it into loans who have deposited with us. We're a nonprofit CDFI. So we have to partner with lots of different folks like you to enable these loans to be closed on time and funded. And we work with a few banks with warehouse lines of credit to support us as well. So I'll stop there. And because I know we have other people on the agenda, and we can take questions at your leisure. Turn it back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Michael. At this point, let's bring in Emily Gorgel. And Emily, if you would just speak to your work, but in general, the idea of, how do you engage community residents and how do you organize?
Yeah, hi everyone. So as Joe said, I do have 2 roles in the community, and today I'm really here with the Family Center to talk about the work that we've done over the past almost 3 years now. I'm happy to answer questions about the city. I'll just need to put on my other hat later on. But for now, I'll just talk about the Family Center. And about 2.5 years ago, the Family Center started a program called Mi Voz, which is my voice in Spanish. And Mi Voz really works to increase the number and scope of opportunities for mobile home park residents to advocate for policy and system changes that reflect issues and solutions identified by and for the community. So very resident and community led. And I would say over the past 3 years, Mi Voz has really worked to improve the flow of information between mobile home park residents and government staff and elected officials. So both within their communities and then outside of their communities. And with government and elected officials, which has traditionally not been a very safe space for people living in mobile home parks and interacting with a government and a system that traditionally hasn't worked for them. So we've really worked to increase information sharing, relationship building, and increasing resident capacity, which has really resulted in a lot of tangible policy and system changes to address housing instability that Andy talked about within mobile home parks. So in addition, Mi Voz builds community capacity to increase that civic engagement and collective action efforts and supports community-led initiatives. And overall, it's really strengthened the community resilience. So in turn, residents have more control over their lives, their surroundings, and really a direct hand in shaping their community. And so, for us, it's really been, let's address the issues that residents in mobile home parks face and give them the tools and the connections where they can really make positive changes in their lives. And this has really come in handy. I think, we recently have been working with Andy. As many people in Fort Collins know, many of the mobile home parks in the area have gone under contract for sale. So one of those, Hickory, Andy has been working with residents. And for us, we've spent 2.5 years working with residents, building their capacity so that when they got that notice that the park was under contract, the community already knew each other well. They were mobilized. And they already had information about their rights as residents and what the ROC process is. So, within a week, residents were able to meet and decide to become a co-op. And if anyone has ever tried to get 204 households to meet at the same time on the same day, sign a piece of paperwork and give $25 to something you don't 100% understand, it's a really big thing to accomplish. So, Hickory, they did get together and form that co-op rather quickly and elected a board. And I think a lot of it has to do with because really building those connections within a community. And so it's great to have the ROC process, but we also have another park that doesn't have resident capacity building that's really struggled to get a community bought into this, and a way to share information, as well as get residents to really believe like that they could do this, that they could own a park and build up their empowerment so that they feel like they could run a park, which is kind of overwhelming, I think, for anyone to think about running 200 homes. And Hickory, as a 204 house community, they're under contract for, I think, $23 million. So we think about coming together to make a purchase that large. It's very overwhelming for residents who traditionally have really struggled financially. So we really work to just support the residents and connect them to information, and also empower them to make changes at the local level that really have impacted their lives. They were also heavily involved in some of the House and state bills that were passed last year in Colorado, and have really been giving a lot of feedback on if those are working. So I'm happy to stop there. I'm really happy that the other folks from the mobile home parks are here to learn about their process as we are in our community going through that process. So thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Emily. I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Stewart, who is with Colorado Health Foundation, who's been very active, not just in the housing space, but in this particular housing type. And Tracy, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk about the role of Colorado Health Foundation and the need for many other folks to step up to the table.
That's great. I'm going to be very, very brief because I'm really interested in the 4 people that are here to speak about their experience. And I think I've met some of these folks before. I will just say that the Colorado Health Foundation's housing strategy sits on 3 pillars, and those pillars are pronounced in serious community engagement, and the ability to provide to be sustainable over time, and a view or a racial justice lens, a kind of an approach that is more inclusive than housing has been in the last 400 years. So there's a whole conversation around each one of those points, but I just want everybody to understand that's where we're coming from, and that's why looking at the mobile home parks looks like displacement, looks like continued racial injustice, as well as economic injustice, given who, especially in rural, who's being housed in the parks and who's not being helped. And I think that our big thing with the coming in on the projects the way we have been that we align seriously with the work of a lot of people here, including some of the folks that aren't on the panel, but on the panel, especially with ROC's sort of, can I call it a rule that there has to be an 81% vote. That means everybody has to be talked to. So that's my introduction to some of the folks that I have already talked to, I think, that are on this call today, who are very serious about keeping their homes. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Great, thanks, Tracy. So we did ask a couple of residents from Durango to just speak to their perspective from a resident's perspective going through this process. A little overwhelming, I'm sure, but with a great deal of satisfaction to see how it's moving forward. So with that, we have Carol Pontius and Coral Smith, who agreed to share some of their perspectives. So ladies, I'm going to let you decide who's going to go first. Or you could speak at the same time, however you want to do that. But again, welcome your comments and perspectives that you can share with the group.
Well, I'll start, Coral. Animus View Mobile Home Park Co-op. We've had 4.5 months of incredible development. We got our notice the park was for sale the day before Christmas. So we had talked about this about 1.5 years ago and it didn't go anywhere. Just because you can't buy a house, a park that's not for sale. So we were waiting for that. And when it happened, we organized. And in terms of when Emily mentioned that Hickory already had strong community ties, we have 116 households. And I would say we didn't really have strong community ties, but we do now. And so we have 92 members of the co-op. There are still people who are sitting back waiting to see how it's going. And so they're not members yet, but 92 out of 116 is pretty good. We experienced in the last, let's see, we had private owners that were really great up until 5 years ago. And then they sold to corporate. And our rent has gone up. Actually, the price is what I want to talk about. The price of our park was sold for $7.7 million in 2015. And now the price is 14 million. So in between there, it sold from one corporation to another, and the price went up 50%, and that's why we're sitting at 14 million. And I'd like, in the chat, I put an article way up at the top of the chat, an article from the New Yorker that explains this whole ballooning interest by corporate, and you guys will love it. So I would ask you to read that. Recently, we went to this is our city council, who was running in their campaign. They all mentioned affordable housing, blah, blah, blah. So our city council has been asked for a loan, and they were sitting back, and they're going to talk about it, and we're going to meet with them again. So what struck me from that meeting, we talked about it for over an hour on a city council meeting. There was discussion. One man said, "We know the residents are making this decision for their own building of wealth." And I thought, well, gee, you know, no one buys a mobile home to build their wealth because they depreciate like cars. So it just shows the lack of, we have a long way to go to educate some of the council members on what this means. You know, when you started this call, you addressed how it was permanent or temporary housing, and now it's permanent. So I think that once we get people to understand, we're not in this to build wealth. Our park is 80% below 80% AMI also. So, and we have, I think 25% or so under 30% of AMI. So we're not in this to build wealth, and no one's buying the park for that at this price anyway. So I really love what Tracy Stewart said. She told us in our initial call with her that housing is the first step toward a healthy community. And I hadn't really thought of it that way, although I know that I'm a social justice person. I'm always involved in everything, and I know that is a fact. And we have to start looking at things like that. So I really appreciate Tracy's perspective. Thanks. Take it away, Coral.
I too would love to sing Tracy's praises. She really educated us in how important it is to come together, build our community, work together, and just get to know each other and work as a community and a team to bring success and people to see that there is hope, because we were just going to be sold again, and it's like, oh gosh, where does this end? And it's a vicious cycle. And I don't have much to say except that I'm super grateful to be here and with this community and my neighbors. And I wanted to give Dan Hunt, who is also on our board in our operations, and John Egan, our president, a chance to talk, because they're both extremely instrumental and much smarter than me. And they have a lot more to offer in community-wise. That means, Dan, you should speak up, or John.
Dan, you want to go ahead? You got a lot to say now.
I'm the operations manager on the board, and I'm very thankful that there's an organization like ROC out there, because even though we might have different backgrounds and perspectives and knowledge, there's no way we could have done it without them. And the financing would have been out of our reach, because we could not have come up with a down payment that would have satisfied any kind of bank, and we could not have shown that we had any kind of track record to make them to believe that we'd be a good lender. The board, each time a park sells, the rent goes up. And we just had a rent increase in January. And so we have one lady that left because of that increase, one that I know of anyways. And the board wants to bring every resident along on this. And so we're very concerned that there's going to be other people displaced because the rent has to go up. The costs are so great that we have to cover that there's no way that we can't do it without some kind of rent increase. And while we have projections on what that might be, we also have a lot of balls in the air that might help with making that easier. And so they're still landing and we're still figuring out things, and we're getting quotes from places so that we have a better sense of specific costs on different items. So we're also the first park in the new state law that went into effect last summer that said that parks, while it's not strictly a first right of refusal, it does give us that opportunity to step in there kind of into first place and negotiate with the park. And my first thought with the current management and owner was that even though the state law says that they need to negotiate in good faith, my sense was that they weren't going to do that. And so with the exception of one item eventually that we got amended to the contract, we couldn't budge them at all in terms of price or in terms of other things. And so, up until the point when they signed the contract, I didn't know whether they were going to sign it because, there wasn't anything in the law that said that they had to do that. We did know at the same time that they were selling like 84, 85 properties. And so, and eventually found out that the Strive, the management company that's likely owned by some of the owners of the property, wanted to shut down. And so, they were probably weighing, do we keep going? Do we just let this other corporation buy us when we might have legal difficulties if we don't sell it to these people? So, but they signed. And so we were happy. I'm pleased with that. And the residents, we had 90 days to come up with a commitment for financing. And ROC did that within the top 90 days. And just before they did their letter of commitment, the park met and we had our vote as to whether to move forward. And that vote was based on, that the rent was going to increase, worst case, $150 to $175 a month. And yet over 90% of the residents at that meeting voted to move forward, some of them knowing that they weren't sure how they were going to make it if that happened. They were just sick and tired of dealing with management that was deferring maintenance and stonewalling requests and whatever. So they were willing to put their residency and displacement issue at risk to move forward. So we're a month out now, and it looks promising that will be in the $100 to $110 range. And yet I'm still worried that there'll be displacement. So through the help of the Rocky Mountain Co-op, Farmers Union Co-op Development Center, they have created a rental assistance program along with a program to help people with purchasing land that couldn't afford it otherwise. And so that's going to be a fund to help those residents that are in the toughest position. So we're hoping to kick that fundraising effort off in the next couple of weeks. That's what I had to say. Thank you.
I'm John Egan. I'm the interim president of the Animas View Mobile Home Park Board. And I think what I'd like to add to this conversation is the experience that we have gone through as a community, because it's been profound already in this short period of time. when we first mobilized, which was in the first week of January, we had 5 people who got together and had the belief and made the commitment to try and make this thing happen without knowing exactly what this thing was. It is by the grace of God that we became familiar with Thistle and Rock. Without their expertise, without Andy's expertise, we never would have pulled this together. But we got lucky, and the thing that impresses me so much about the experience that we've had is that, again, we have 116 residents here, and so many of them were willing to take the risk and take a shot at who knows what. We didn't know what we were going to end up doing, or what this would look like, or could we afford it. What has evolved out of this? We started out as a trailer park, if you will, with a bunch of people who lived in trailers. And in this short period of time, we have become a community. And what I mean by that is, I know people, and I've lived here almost, well, right at 9 years right now. And I know people now who have lived here that long and longer, who I had no idea who they were. And all of a sudden, I know their names, they know who I am, and we have a common belief that what we are doing is to the benefit of our community, the mobile home park, but also to the city of Durango. We're making an effort to retain residents here who are contributors to the community, contributors to the tax rolls. They're working people who, if this park were to suddenly disappear, they'd have to go someplace else. And so that would be a detriment to the town of Durango, because so many people, well, a lot of people work at the grocery stores here, and so on. And what happens when all of a sudden they have to go away? So I really feel like what we have done is we have made a contribution through our efforts to the town itself. And as Dan was saying a moment ago, one of the commitments we made as a board was to do everything in our power to keep from losing residents, even knowing that we were going to see an increase in rents. And we didn't know what that increase looked like. Some of those people, as Dan pointed out, weren't sure what the rent increases might look like, and thought very probably that they'd have to move anyway, but they voted in favor of it. So our commitment to them was to do everything in our power to make it possible for them to stay. And so much so that we've had residents who are paying rent like anybody else who said, listen, if we put together a little fund, a rainy day fund, if you will, where we could put a few bucks aside so that when somebody does have a bad month, maybe we can help them out and help to cover their rent and so on. And people have really engaged that idea, and I think it speaks to the character of the people who are living here and how much they value the community that we have. I have to say, Emily was talking about in getting everybody kind of organized. We are blessed because the people who serve on our board all have some sort of expertise that they can bring to the table that really makes the difference. I can't say enough about the contributions that Dan Hunt has made just in the research and the work that he's done in helping to put this together. Coral, too, has just been amazing in her input on this project, and she's our treasurer and keeps a very close watch on our checkbook. And Karen is she's the one who lends the voice to the community itself and kind of keeps us organized. I look at myself not so much as a president of an organization. I kind of look at myself as more like the ringmaster, and in a 3-ring circus, because it's kind of felt like that along the way. Sometimes we haven't been completely certain of how we were going to get from point A to point B or what the steps were involved, but we've made it. We've made it this far. And I just want to say to anybody who is contemplating this idea that it can be done. We have proved it. And when we sign those papers in mid-June, we will have accomplished in this very short period of time what we set out to do. And I didn't think we could, to tell you the truth. I had no idea that there were people in the world who actually valued the concept of mobile home parks to the point where they're willing to put up some money to help preserve them. So this has been a huge education for all of us. And I know I speak for the board when I say we are so grateful for what certainly what Andy has brought to the table, what Thistle Rock has brought to the table. Then, you know, they have saved our homes. We appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That's great. So if anybody has questions, certainly feel free to raise your hand. Again, that'll make it easier for me to track who has questions and when they, you know, kind of the order. In the meantime, maybe while I'm waiting for some folks to, you know, contemplate their questions, just want to maybe re-emphasize a couple of quick points. You may have recognized that, you know, all this discussion is about preserving manufactured home communities, trailer parks. And again, apologies if anybody takes exception to the terminology. I lived in a trailer and I called it a trailer park. So, you know, everyone calls it something different. But the point is that Rock USA started this specifically for mobile home communities or manufactured home communities. And there really isn't as a well-defined structure for other types of housing. So in other words, there's always been some discussion, why mobile home parks? Why don't we look to convert apartment buildings to resident owned, which is something that is you know, fairly commonplace, especially in the East Coast, in the urban markets where that's happened, not necessarily to the residents' advantage, but it should be noted that there just isn't that infrastructure that exists for those housing types to convert to resident ownership. So it really is at this point limited to manufactured home communities. And so with that, I see Ms. Kermode from Gunnison wants to weigh in with a question. So please, Jennifer.
Thank you, Joe. And thanks to all of you at Animus View. I really commend you for jumping off the cliff and finding that it was a relatively soft landing, that you now all can stay where you are. It's exciting to hear that. We have tried with Andy at Rock to purchase a mobile home that's for sale here unsuccessfully. We have owners that could really care less unless the purchase price is okay. So I have two questions, and they're kind of dichotomous or split apart. One is, what did it take to get the residents to engage? And the other one is for Rock, if you only require 80% of the owners, the mobile home owners, to participate, how does that work with the financing and the monthly lot rent that everybody contributes?
Thanks, Jennifer. Andy, Michael, do you want to take that
Sure.
on?
Yeah, I can comment, and Michael can correct me if I get anything wrong here. You know, in terms of the financing and like that mention of 80% membership, I mean, the reality is that all members that live in the community and non-members still have a lot rent to pay, and that agreement is still in place. Being a member of the cooperative entitles them to, you know, greater control and power and ability to be involved in those processes. I mean, you know, displacement is absolutely not something that we're in favor of. And so residents that choose not to join the cooperative at transition do not have to, but they cannot be involved in the, you know, business decisions of the cooperative. And so, you know, that's really the big advantage we try to encourage, that if you want to show up and see that budget and vote on it or be involved in the board or do A, B, or C, you know, that's part of the membership. And, you know, over time, we typically see that there's a pretty natural transition of people joining the cooperative because it's such a low barrier of entry. that there's really no reason not to. As well as after closing, the creation of the community does require that any incoming new, residents would join that cooperative. So I hope that answers your question there. In terms of the resident organizing side of things, I'd love to hear what the board here has to say about those processes. I mean, the reality is that, we're here with the resources, but it's the residents' decisions to take that step forward. And as you mentioned, kind of jump off that cliff. So board, what did you guys all think about those initial meetings and how you brought people together?
I'll take a run at that one real quickly, because I remember when we decided to go out and start talking to our residents, again, I did not believe we could actually make this thing happen. And I think what actually impressed people in talking to them was saying, I'm not sure we can really do this, being completely transparent with them about it and saying, hey, if you put up your $25 and we can't make it happen, you're going to get your $25 back. But if we don't do this time around, we will never have another opportunity to buy this park because the price will be astronomical. It will be beyond anybody to be able to put that together. I think I could add to that. You would have to see our trailer park to really appreciate it, because I said trailer park, I said the T word. It's a pretty unique place in that we're right on the banks of the Animas River. We've got a very bucolic setting here. We have the narrow gauge railroad that runs between Durango and Silverton that passes by every day, and we go out and wave to the train every day, and it almost feels like a club. And so I think people value and have always valued this mobile home park. And I think that made a difference. Emily, you mentioned that you had a hard time getting anybody to be organized because some people just didn't care. Everybody I talked to here cared. They just didn't know how to make it happen. And so when these 5 people got together and took a run at it, they were willing to put their faith in us to see that it got done. They had nothing to lose. And so I think that made a big difference.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, and
Brett.
can I just add one thing from a national perspective? I agree with everything John just said, and we see that over and over and over again in every state that we work in. 90% of the time, you start knocking on doors, you have that first meeting, people are interested and want to at least explore the process for $25. The 10% of the time, it's hard to always grasp why that 10% didn't come together as a group. Sometimes it's people haven't lived there that long. Sometimes it's people are working 2 jobs and don't have time to go to a meeting. So it can be a number of things that get in the way, but 90% of the time, like the group in Durango, it comes together the way it did. And so, of course, that's the glue that keeps the whole process going, people getting together and deciding they want to move forward and take the next step.
Thanks. Brad.
Yes, Brad Turner, RMG Engineers. First off, you can hear me, right? Am I good? Okay, good. Incredibly moving story, and I think this is an amazing cause. I actually have 2 questions as well, kind of big and little. One is the new infrastructure plan that the Biden administration is attempting to roll out going to free up any sort of like national or federal funding for ROC, or possibly challenges just because of maybe, I don't know if we're going solar or, certain stipulations. So I just wondered if there was any discussion regarding that. And my second question is towards ROC, is you did recommend, say earlier, the pre-loan involved like some civil and environmental engineers. So my second question is that up to ROC to decide on that, or is that the individual homeowner that has to go through that process? Because that is not an easy process to go through. they know.
I'll address the first question about the federal infrastructure bills that are out there. And Andy, maybe you can address the second question about how things work in pre-development with the engineers and everything. It's not part of my job personally to go up on Capitol Hill and lobby for infrastructure money for these communities, but it is happening. My boss, Paul Bradley, the president of Rock USA, spends some of his time on federal policy work, and we have some policy advocacy consultants who help us. So the answer to that is yes, there's effort along those lines to get some of that infrastructure money dedicated to this purpose. How it's all going to shake out in the final, bills that are being vetted right now, we don't know, but we've got some very good experienced federal housing advocacy people working on it.
And yeah, just to chime in briefly on the infrastructure engineering question in the pre-development phase. Like Michael mentioned earlier, Rock Capital does offer forgivable pre-development loans to help the community, finance that initial, investigation. Thistle Rock would work as a local partner to provide resources as to recommended engineers, recommended, appraisers, things like that. But of course, it's always a decision of the cooperative to choose who they want to work and, who they want to have that work be done. And so, we're always looking for different options to have on the table, but it's important that, as a cooperative, they're making that decision as to who they want to engage with.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Megan, you had a question. Megan Overton, sorry.
That's okay. You broke up right then. I was like, oh, maybe a me. Thanks, Joe. I was really curious to hear a little bit more from, I think it was Dan who mentioned the rent assistance program through the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union Cooperative Development Center. I think one of the things, I'm from Fort Collins, one of the things that we've been talking about is the different roles that need to be filled to really get over the finish line with a project like this. And the increased rent is one that I just really wanted to know more about that. It sounds like a great partnership.
So Dan Hobbs with Rocky Mountain Co-op Development Center. I met him because I'm affiliated also with another group that is searching for land and how to figure out how to buy land when there's not necessarily enough money for that. And so Dan offered to start a fund, kick in some seed money, and offered to contact Southwest Community Foundation, which he did, and they signed a contract, and so it's actually going to be a community effort to raise this money. And initially, I guess, because of the point that we're at as a park, is that the focus will be on raising funds for rental assistance. So I spoke with the director of Southwest Community Foundation yesterday, and she's going to work through with us on a press release and how to talk about, how to connect people with them to give money, basically. And then I haven't seen the contract yet, so I'm not sure who's going to be, how the disbursement's going to happen, but we need to make it easy, and maybe it's once a month. We say we need this much money, and then we also need somebody else, whether it's a property manager or maybe Housing Solutions of the Southwest, to vet the monies that we need to give out. So we're still working on a few pieces of it, but it's been really a nice breath of relief to know that the funding is there to start working with.
Awesome, thank you.
Excuse me. Looks like Karen posted a link on the chat that has a link for the Rocky Mountain Union that was referred to. Deidre.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Sullivan from, I'm CEO of United Way of Larimer County and a huge longtime supporter and proponent of this work. I kind of have a follow-up question to Megan's and also Dan's response as a funder around if there are examples of communities where funders have come together and co-invested in flexible and nimble responsive dollars. And I would include municipal county governments in that as well, because the volatility and the need to respond quickly and the options are so diverse and varied, from resident ownership through rent assistance, that I'm curious about how we as funders can have a collective community trust or something, and if that's been done elsewhere, so that the urgency sometimes that's needed and board approvals and things like that have to go through can be aren't barriers to rapidly available dollars.
With the state law, we only have 180 days to close. And so that knocks a lot of potential partners out of the loan process. And we're fortunate that Homes Fund and Colorado Health Foundation were able to work within the timeline that we have. The city of Durango, we don't know yet whether they can work within that timeline. So that one's going right up to the wire. We have done a loan grant application to the Department of Local Affairs, and that's running up to the wire as well. And one thing I'd like to comment too about them is our contact there did make a comment that they are expecting federal monies for housing and some other things that they can use for, possibly to help with situations like ours. And that they were, maybe this summer, some of that money would start showing up. Thistle and Rock focus on the loan. And so as the operations manager, and along with some help from them, I've been looking at the expenses moving forward and trying to look at those line items that maybe we can make a difference of. Because, a loan can save a resident roughly $42 a month, or cost a resident roughly $42 a month per $1 million for the life of the loan, whereas $100,000 of expenses per year costs each resident about $70 a month. So, each area has its own way of reducing rents or affecting rents. And so there's things within the expense area that we've been looking at to try and make it work better. And some of those will extend past the closing. And so there might be other entities out there that we might try to partner with to assist us down the road. And then, there's the rental assistance thing that we're fortunate to get into place at the point that we have here now, that hopefully will continue as long as we need it. And the thing about it too is that, we're leaping off into that piece without knowing exactly how much residents need, but knowing that there's a need there. Like one lady told me that after she pays money to the property manager, she has $125 left. So we know that there's some people that have a need, but we just don't know how strong that need is. And I think that if there's funds there that we may not need, then that would then move into a community funding type thing.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Hey, Joe, maybe Michael can talk a little bit more about the partnerships.
Yeah, Deirdre, that's a great question. And, part of our job here in pulling together for the, $15 million plus at Animas View is to find all the partners that want to participate and streamline the process as much as possible with all the history and underwriting capacity that we have at Rock USA Capital. So I'd like to talk to you and others more about that after, obviously we're running out of time here today, but let's keep that conversation going. I think there are ways that United Way and other local foundations and entities can pool their resources in conjunction with us to make this more efficient in time and streamline the way money gets approved and delivered. So I'd be happy to follow up on that with you.
Yeah, and I'll just point out that we are going to be sending out contact information for everybody that's on our panel today. So that'll go out to everybody, so you'll have an opportunity to follow back up. Jennifer Grimmer, good to see you, Jennifer.
Yeah, you too. I'm Jennifer Grimmer with Energy Outreach Colorado. So on the conversation of expense reduction, our mission is to reduce utility costs and make sure people can afford energy. And so I'd really love to just bring this energy conversation into this, because we really see that if we can reduce people's energy costs, then they can better afford maybe, investing in these higher, rents, right? And thinking about one of the things that we see 25% of the work that we do statewide in weatherization and energy efficiency in income qualified households is in manufactured housing and mobile parks. So we're investing a lot of money into equipment. There's also a lot of challenges we see with water quality in some of these parks, and also natural gas infrastructure. So one of the things I just want people thinking about as we look at the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals and sort of the Biden's infrastructure is how we really do think about electrification and some of the new strategies, solar, storage, really exciting things that can add to the capital stack of these projects that can reduce people's long-term, energy affordability, really improve the health and safety of homes. When we go into a lot of mobile homes, we are seeing a lot of really unhealthy, furnaces, lack of insulation. There's just a huge opportunity in this space. So I just want to really start to connect these energy, dollars along with the affordable housing strategies that we can really help that longer term affordability. So happy to be part of that conversation. We're really looking actively at lots of funding in this space. So Dan, I would love a call from you and figure out how to, help your residents, get our energy assistance and think about, long-term energy affordability, reduce those operating costs.
Thanks for bringing that up, Jennifer. If you don't mind, I'm going to share your contact information with folks as well, if that's okay. Or if you want to send me a link of who on your staff you would like to have as a kind of a connection to folks that wanted to pursue that. And I think, Brad, you had, did you have another question? Oh, okay, great. All right, so we are getting right up against our closing time, and apologize if we didn't schedule enough time for this, because I'm sure I know just looking at the chat, there's a lot else going on. So I just wanted to maybe mention a couple of things. One question that does come up from time to time is whether or not the residents are taking on personal liability for these loans to purchase through their cooperative. And I think it's, Michael, I'll let you speak to that, but that's one that often comes up. If folks are having trouble, coming up with a little bit extra rent, how can they qualify for financing? If you could just talk about that real briefly. Yeah, sure. So the answer is no, they're not personally liable for any of the financing. The corporation that they form is a legal corporation under Colorado law and has all the legal protections of a corporation so that individuals are shielded from personal financial liability. Of course, there's various insurance requirements we have, et cetera. But I think more to your point, the cooperative model is such that, everybody pays per month what they pay, and the financing is structured based on that revenue stream of 116 sites at Animas View times the lot rent per month for each household. And of course, there's allowances for vacancy and there's allowances for, some lot rent not being collected. But, so that's just the lending process to underwrite the revenue from the property. But in our world of
cooperative manufactured home communities, there's typically very little rent that's lost. As you've heard from the homeowners at Animas View, they're vested like nobody else can be vested in that property. And they tend to pay what they need to pay to operate their corporation in their community every month. So we make small allowances. We make small allowances for that, but a lot isn't required. Everybody pretty much invests their time, their effort, and their money to make this successful.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Well, with that, we are at just at the noon hour. So again, very much appreciate. Too bad we're not in person. We could give a nice standing ovation to our panelists who very generously provided their time and expertise, and certainly a special welcome and thank you to all of the residents of Animas View for taking your time to share your experiences. Obviously, a very personal issue, and again, very, very happy that you were able to pull this off in a very short period of time. I think the lesson is, don't wait for the 90 days. For anybody that is concerned about parks in their community, you can't start organizing residents early enough. Sometimes it takes years, and I think that certainly has spoken to, you know, some of the examples you've heard today. But again, start early and utilize the resources that you now know about to help you accomplish that. And so with that, thank you all for taking your time. And again, you should be expecting to see an email that'll have links to the website where you'll be able to access the recording of this, as well as the presentation materials, along with contact information for the folks you heard from today. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next event next quarter. And with that, on behalf of the Northern Colorado Housing Now group, we thank you and have a fantastic weekend.